So the way that we've looked at it is that we look at it as or at least the way I've been looking at it, I'll say it that way, is that if I have a function that is running on its own and it only has one purpose to basically turn this one widget or turn this one wheel, and it does it on its own, then that's a that's non-human identity, at work. And that's how we define it. So therefore it's the Lambda that goes off and does the thing, and then you get an end product, and it can't do anything else other than that one thing. But that's that's kind of the overall goal, and that's that's where the access and everything, that's kind of the guardrails in which it sits on.
So Chris, you picked a real easy one for your first topic. What do you have for number 2?
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Not bad for coming live to you on a Sunday morning.
It is a Sunday morning, that's for sure. I think we're both struggling with like allergies or colds or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I figured by this point of the summer, I wouldn't have to worry about allergies, but I checked the Weather Channel. We're high for ragweed, which is probably the thing that hits me the most. So I'm like breathing through my mouth. So if you hear me gasping, it's because I've been talking too long. But
what's a good reminder to shut up?
What's that?
That's a good reminder to shut up.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if I'm gasping for air, it means I've been talking for too long straight.
Exactly.
Yeah. So scoured LinkedIn last night, and what a treasure trove of ideas. One thing that I got into was an article about the Oklahoma mobile driver's license. That wasn't even on my radar, right? Oklahoma's now moving forward with the mobile driver's license. I feel like every state at some level is moving forward with mobile driver's license. And it definitely feels like it's in the lane of digital identity, don't you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're presenting a credential to say this is who I am. That is absolutely digital identity.
Yeah. It's a new area. I think that a lot of us are, needing to learn. So this goes back to the digital identity versus IAM. Our foundation was more in the IAM space, which included customer IAM, so internal, external. But now there's this newer area around like decentralized identity, blockchain, stuff like that, where, most of us haven't specialized in, but understanding not only the use cases, but also the technology, I think is a real, challenge, but opportunity. I kind of feel like overall that's the thing in the digital identity space, is what makes this field so exciting is the challenge is well, you constantly, things are coming up and things are moving forward where you're having to learn and figure things out. But that's also the exciting part, is that it doesn't sit still and it's not static, and we're having the opportunity to learn all these new things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the natural evolution of any role, anywhere, anytime. Things move forward. You've got to stay current, unless you're a COBOL or mainframe programmer. Apparently, you can like do that work and then like go away for a while and then come back and make a ton of money because nobody knows how to do it anymore.
Exactly. Well, that's the key as well. Is like sometimes sitting still can work to your benefit, but I don't know. That's never been my personality style. So. Yeah, but we always talk about our conference discount codes. I think we should get into that in a minute. But that's a great way to stay current too, is just going to those conferences. We always talk about the hallway conversations, and that's such a great value. But actually sitting in the sessions and seeing how people are solving some of these new use cases for identity is a way to stay current. And so, to the extent that you can afford to take the time, spend the money to be out at conferences, especially looking for events that are local to you or local enough that it's not a major expenditure. I think is great. And of course, having a company that supports that is great as well. Our guest today kind of ties together the 2 points I was making, because we see him at a lot of conferences. So obviously his organization sees the value in sending him to conferences. And that's how we've, built a contact and I think a friendship as well. But also, just the idea of like being out of conferences and learning all these new topics, and then taking the position of, wanting to share that information with the rest of the community. So I think that's, what you get out of conferences.
Yeah, let's talk about those conference discount codes. We've got Identity Week. We've got the America and the Asia conference both coming up here. You and I are going to be at the Identity Week America in Washington, D.C. on September 11th and 12th. We're going to be doing podcast stuff, but I'm actually also hosting like an hour of identity and access management talks and a panel and stuff like that. So still working through the details on that, but I have volunteered to do that. So if you use the code IDAC30, you get 30% off of your registration. And that code works for both the US and the Asia shows. So if you're going to one or both, feel free to use that code. Good free way to save some money and show support for the show. The other one we've got coming up is the Authenticate conference from the FIDO Alliance. That is October 14th through the 16th in Carlsbad, California, which awesome weather. Love it. We were there last year, and I think we've been to the last few Authenticates at this point, but we have a discount code for that one as well. IDAC 15, IDAC 15 gets you 15% off of your registration. So you and I are going to be at that one too. I know that there's a meeting. I think we had to reschedule a couple times, but there's one probably next week to kind of talk through a little more kind of what we're going to be doing, some of the ideas we had for doing shows there. But
yeah, looking forward to have Andrew Shikiar as a guest on an upcoming episode. I think the next episode.
Yeah, I think he's the reigning champion right now on number of appearances on this, and we're always happy to support
during Identiverse. We had him on during Identiverse, and I think that was number 8. So he's looking at episode number 9. So it's not only in the lead, but he's lapped people a few times now.
Well, Saturday Night Live does like a, 5 timers club with like a smoking jacket type thing. And you're all about those, flashy jackets. I want to know what you're going to do for if someone makes it to 10 episodes on what are we going to do about that?
Take one of my classy jackets and throw an Identity at the Center sticker on it.
That is a Jim answer if I've ever heard one.
That's weak sauce, right? All right. Well, we can come up with something.
Yeah, we'll come up with
something
than
that.
All right. Well, why don't we get to our main topic and our main and only guest today, I guess. His name is Chris Bauer. He's a senior manager of identity and access management at Sallie Mae. He's been with us before, all the way back in episode 162, where I believe that's the first time, at least that I remember meeting Chris. And we had a nice little kind of conversation up in the suite, if you remember that, at Gartner. Was at Caesars a few years back. Got to know Chris there a little bit. But welcome back to the show, Chris.
I'll say thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I'll say it's been a long ride, but it's been a fun ride for the last 2 years. Getting going from that and getting to know you too, and of course the identity space a lot better over the last 2 years through those conferences.
Yeah, and speaking of conferences, this is actually technically your third appearance on the show, because when we were at the Identiverse conference earlier this year, we had kind of like a Q&A with Andrew Shikiar asking some questions about passwordless and authentication, just FIDO in general. And I believe you stepped up to the microphone in our little kind of area that we were recording and actually asked a question. So if you recognize the voice, there you go. This is technically your third time on the show.
I'm shooting for 10. Jeff. I want to get a jacket. That's my goal now.
You want Jim's leftover jacket with a hastily applied Identity Center sticker applied to it.
And a marker writing number 10 on the back.
That's right. Chris, people in the US might be familiar with Sallie Mae, but I always like to talk about, we talk about this as a global audience. Not everyone's familiar with what Sallie Mae does. Why don't we start with that? Tell us a little bit about what Sallie Mae does, and then I'd love to just kind of hear about your role at Sallie Mae. What does a senior manager of identity and access management do for an organization like that?
Well, Sallie Mae is a private student loan provider. We help individuals get through their journey of, getting a better education through various colleges and universities by providing ways to get you your, the funding that you need to get from one point in your journey to the next. From an IAM standpoint, what I've been doing and what I work with primarily is on the inside of the house, the workforce management side of Sallie Mae. So everything from the B2B and to the individual employees to contractors that we use on a day-to-day basis, helping manage their access is my bread and butter, is what I focus on a day-to-day basis. As a senior IAM operations manager, my role is to help manage a team of roughly 10 people who spend their days taking care of what I call the pillars of IAM from a workforce management side of things. That's the governance of the house, doing regular access certifications on a quarterly basis, taking care of the day-to-day provisioning of access, joiners, movers, leavers, basically through the entire life cycle, as well as taking care of just, overall just day-to-day aspects of what the workforce needs to be able to get into their, into their individual applications, helping our teams, make those connections between new vendors and new applications, getting them onboarded into our systems.
So, Chris, you're really living the identity and access management life, right? So you're in there, and I saw your LinkedIn post last night. Actually, I'm not sure how old it was at that point, but you're out there now committing to blog about identity and access management topics for the betterment of kind of like paying it forward, right? I think is the fancy way to say it these days, getting this, at least your opinions out there on many different topics. You started with your first blog, which was kind of just saying, I'm going to do this thing. So now the commitment's out there, and I hit you up and said, hey, the commitment's out there. How would you like to come on the Identity Center podcast and kind of talk about what some of these topics we can expect to see you blogging about? So maybe you could kind of walk us through a few of those. Let's start with the first one. What is the hottest topic that you have in mind for blog number one?
So blog number one, I think, is going to be around maturing the non-human identity. That, we've been going through quite a process lately and been talking about it a lot internally for last several months, really for a little over a year, on how to properly manage and maintain a listing of all of our access that doesn't belong to a human being, doesn't actually, isn't connected to a contractor or an employee here at Sallie. With that, we've actually had our own database that we've been using for quite some time to basically we've homegrown our own system, so to speak, to basically take care of that for the last several years. And lovingly, we would like to kind of put that to bed and actually try to see what the next level of that looks like. So much like when we saw each other at Identiverse, that was kind of one of my main purposes of being there, is to stroll the vendor hall and kind of get a better feeling of what was out there in that space. And what I found is that it's a lot more mature than I thought it was. But yet but talking to them, I also recognize that there was a lot of room for, that they all know that there's still a lot of room for growth. There's still a lot of room for standardization and for governance around it. And that's what I've been, that's what I've been researching lately. And that's where my next set of articles are going to go towards is basically that research and kind of the, what I've acknowledged or what I picked up to, like Jim said, pay it forward. So in line with that, Jim, I'm going to kind of throw this back at you a little bit. When you think about non-human identity, what do you think is probably the most important things to look forward to or look into?
So you're talking about the non-identity space right at the moment. So, I want to first kind of put on the table a thought that I've been having recently, which was around this CrowdStrike outage that we all kind of like experienced at some level. And I'm not sure how badly that hit you, but one thing that I thought about is that we have all these machines now going out and performing updates. And it got me thinking about, the whole SolarWinds thing that happened, what was it, a year and a half, 2 years ago now, where we have powerful machine accounts in the environment that we just say, okay, they have a legitimate requirement to exist and they do these things. And so from an identity and access management standpoint, we say they're legitimate and the business tells us they need them, so we're okay with that. And that's that. I think as cybersecurity professionals as a whole, we need to know what our risk is relative to those items, right? Or to those non-human accounts. I don't know that we necessarily have the technology right now to catch something like that on the fly to necessarily have controls that could prevent a SolarGate or prevent what happened with CrowdStrike. But I certainly think we need to do a better job of inventorying where our risks are relative to these accounts. I don't think that a lot of people even understand all the accounts that exist and, have a way to kind of like, all right, well, it's kind of like what I say is it's hard to manage what you can't measure. Do we have that measurement of those accounts of the risk relative to these powerful non-human identity accounts? So I think that's one big topic that I've been thinking on, that I'm out there looking for, people to tell me, no, you're wrong, Jim. We are doing that, or that's not important to do, or yes, you're right. That is something we need to get our arms around, and here's a framework for doing it. I think the second thing overall that makes non-human accounts, one of the things we keep hearing in the industry is that non-human accounts now outnumber human accounts. So I think you're very much on to a topic that is, absolutely critical. And I don't see that going back the other way. I only see it getting, becoming bigger and bigger of a problem to solve in terms of we're doing more and more automation, and that requires more and more non-human accounts that can go about, carrying out these activities. And so I think you have the traditional Windows service accounts. And if what I'd encourage people to do is like not look at like that as the entire problem, because I feel like in the past, identity and access management has said, okay, you've got these Windows service accounts and that's 75% of the problem. And then you've got these applications and Linux situations where, maybe somebody hard-coded an account, and it's like, that's 10-year-old thinking. You've got to also think now about the whole DevOps environment and how accounts are being used to build infrastructure and deploy applications, and what is the risk of those accounts. And then robotic process automation. So there's just like a much bigger picture of non-human accounts. And I think the first thing is really understanding the landscape. And then the second is understanding the use cases for those accounts and then applying controls in a proper way. So I'll stop there and kind of see what Jeff is thinking.
Look, this isn't a new problem. These accounts have been here forever. Since the dawn of IT, there's been service accounts. I think, yes, it's going to proliferate, but I just don't see this as a new problem. This is forever. Now, the technology has probably gotten better to the point where it's easier to manage and track these things, but I still believe this is a governance first issue. These didn't just start popping up when AI was invented, right? Or things like that. There's been service accounts for as far back. I think this is where we fall back on policy and standards and procedures to say, okay, we've created a service account. Here is the purpose for it. Do we have good metadata around it? Who's responsible for it? Is it being used for its intended purpose, or did we share it and use it for another service that, oh, this looks like it's similar. let's just reuse it for that kind of thing. I'm hopeful that some of these new technologies in the non-human identity space will be able to dissect that a little bit, but I find that really difficult onyon to kind of peel to say, okay, how is it going to know who it belongs to, right? There's no human identifier tagged to it. You're still going to have to go through a process to say, okay, Chris, you've got these, 50 different service accounts that you're using to run your applications or your services in your environment. Tell me about them. What do they do? Are they scoped correctly from a permission standpoint? Or did we just say, well, let's give them domain admin and they can do whatever they want? So I think there will be a lot of business conversations and helping the business, and the business in this case might be IT, understand, what is the risk associated with these accounts? What are you using them for? Do we still need them? Because a lot of times these service accounts or other types of non-human identities stick around forever because we're afraid to remove them or disable them because, it might break something. And the next thing you know, you've got a whole bunch of little, micro perforations in your identity wall where if one of these accounts were to get breached, you'd be able to come through and do whatever you need to do. So it is interesting. I think this is a topic that is definitely becoming more important, especially with, the more automation we do into things. But I'm curious to see, Chris, where you think this is heading. And if you've seen any specific products or things like that, or capabilities maybe that might be like, ooh, yeah, I need that to make my program more effectively.
If I could, Jeff, I just wanted to follow up with one other point that I forgot to mention, which is, service accounts traditionally have weak authentication controls, right? They're not eligible for multi-factor authentication. So if somebody could enter the network with those accounts, that's a big problem. And then, of course, if they have very simple passwords that, if you're relying on password only or certificate only, but let's say password only, you've got to make that as difficult and not guessable as possible and be rotating those passwords if possible so that no human being even within your organization knows the password.
So I agree with everything that that Jim and Jeff you're saying. I'm going to say we're definitely taking a look at it from a governance point of view first and foremost to kind of go along with what Jeff was talking about. We've been I've been doing research. There's not to name drop too much, but like on LinkedIn, there's actually a non-human identity organization that's kind of being founded out there. They have their own website that basically kind of is beginning to bring awareness up on what a non-human identity is and how to start building controls around it. And I really appreciate what the work that they've been doing, as well as I think that NIST actually is beginning to take their first swings at it, trying to get the details down of what a non, they call it, I believe they call it an NPE, a non-person entity is, and try to get into that. So there's been that's the research that I've been looking into on that end, as well as knowing full well that the auditors and the GRC groups that we work with are very, very, very interested in trying to figure out how to say that, how to build controls around it, in the sense of saying, can we get to the points of an application identity only having one select purpose, so therefore when it kind of leaves its boundaries or leaves its area of expertise, or it gets overscoped or overused in some way. Again, bringing us back to identity and that into the whole space of least privileged. How do we keep it in its own swim lane and keep it going?
Hey, Chris, let me follow up with one more thing, because you just triggered something. So you talked about governing these non-human identities, which brings me to the question is there such a thing as a non-human identity? And I think most people answer the question yes, but is it a non-human identity, or are there non-human accounts? Because from a governance standpoint, I think somebody's got to own these accounts. I don't really think they are identities. I think identities are like the people process. And now maybe with AI, we get into the point where there's actually intelligence enough that you can say, okay, that's an identity. It can do the activities that a human being would do in an intelligent enough way to say, yes, this account is still required. Yes, that is still least privilege for this account. But I think that's what an identity does. I think an account is really what exists for the most part today, and those accounts, or the process that creates those accounts, needs to be owned by a human being. What are your thoughts there?
I absolutely agree. I mean, the way that we currently manage them and the way we'll manage them in the future, absolutely, that there will be owners involved and, owners for each of those individual applications, be it an IT business owner or an IT technical owner in some way. And they do, and they get applied through certification processes, just like any other account that we handle. So they get reviewed for what they can do.
So what do you have for topic number? Oh, I'm
hold
sorry,
on.
Jeff,
I slightly disagree here. So I think absolutely any account can have an identity associated with it. So if we're talking about let's just call it machine account, right? Non-human. It's in the name, non-human identity. This is what we're talking about. So we're saying, okay, this account belongs to some entity that is performing some sort of transaction or action. That entity can be human or can not be human. And in the case of a non-human entity or identity, that we definitely need to have ownership assigned to that. But I don't know if it's necessarily a person. It may be another entity that is responsible for that account. IT is responsible for this non-human identity. The identity and access management team is responsible for this specific identity, or marketing or e-commerce or whatever it may be. And I think as these non-human identities start to evolve and become more, well, dare I say it, self-aware, there may be some associated with that to say, okay, well, Cortana, right? Let's call it that, or in the Microsoft parlance, if you're a Halo fan or whatever, there's probably a whole bunch of different service accounts that run underneath the non-human identity called Cortana. Now, Cortana might belong to, an IT organization or an AI department within it. So I can see the argument to be made to say, no, these are identities. It's just that we have to wrap our head around a different way to think about it. It's not just human or non-human. There's an account. What is its identity? Sure, certainly, if we don't have a strategy around it, it just might be a loose collection of accounts that are just, these belong to IT. Whoever runs Active Directory, here you go. You guys figure it out, right? But I feel like I have to make the case for, we need to think about this more strategically in broader terms. Say, okay, we're talking about logical constructs here, an identity, an account, ownership or responsible party, right? Things like that. And I don't always see a one-to-one match that it's human to non-human or vice versa.
So the way that we've looked at it is that we look at it as or at least the way I've been looking at it, I'll say it that way, is that if I have a function that is running on its own and it only has one purpose, to basically turn this one widget or turn this one wheel, and it does it on its own, then that's a that's non-human identity, at work. And that's how we define it. So therefore it's the Lambda that goes off and does the thing, and then you get an end product, and it can't do anything else other than that one thing. But that's that's kind of the overall goal, and that's that's where the access and everything, that's kind of the guardrails in which it sits on.
So Chris, you picked a real easy one for your first topic. What do you have for number two?
Well, number two, I want to say I would be interested in hearing more about another topic that's top of mind to me is the IAM space moving away from RBAC? Is RBAC something that I recognize that RBAC is going to be around for quite some time? This is not like, I forget the particular tool, like, SAML that we talk about is getting ready to die, or SAML's dead when we go to the Identiverse. But instead of that, in that sense, is the hourglass turned over on RBAC, in which we are now kind of working our way to sunsetting RBAC? Are we at the beginning of that and moving towards a policy, moving more towards a policy access control instead? Personally, what I run into is that we've been too connected and too heavily reliant on our, for example, HR, basically our HR systems and our HR data. So therefore, it's great that that is the beginning of identity, but using that identity information as kind of the foundational layer has become more challenging, because HR systems and HR groups and benefits groups and all the other groups that are out there that basically interact with that data have decided to start architecturing it differently, have started using it in different ways and have put a different lens on it. So so when they decide to make big sweeping changes, it affects my RBAC. So therefore, at this point, I'm looking at it more in a curious state of, has the industry kind of acknowledged that, those things do happen, or those things are beginning to happen? And maybe we should start breadcrumbing basically our policy, a policy engine to basically take care of these things instead. Sure, still use that workforce management application or that human resources data that comes in, but use it as a metadata or use it as an attribute on top of it, or as a note to it, to be able to say, okay, if you belong to this department, you get this limited amount of access, and then you work for this manager, you get this little bit more access, and then your title says this, okay, you get this. Now that you have those things, then we start talking about the denies. We start talking about, because you are in these departments and in these things, maybe you don't need to see all this other types of access that's out there, and maybe you shouldn't, because of toxic combinations, you shouldn't be able to get into these things at all either. I'm curious if you're seeing more growth in that space.
I think the RBAC hourglass has been perpetually tipped on its side, cracked with little pieces of sand falling out of it for a very long time. I can't think of too many IAM constructs that have such a positive, that could have a positive thing on access, that has been so poorly implemented and just addressed by not only the market, but the organizations that try to leverage as well. I see so many organizations that struggle with RBAC in general, because it's become way too complicated for organizations to actively, perform the exercise of creating the roles in a way that makes sense, is scalable, and they can actually keep up with it. Most organizations that I've talked to and have seen got down the road of maybe 6 months to a year into it, and they're like, "Oh, this sucks. Forget it. I'm gonna do something else." So I think I think this is where things like policy-based, attribute-based, other types of, back have come along to try and fill in the cracks around this. The idea of RBAC sounds great on paper until it hits the real world, and you have a real organization that has hundreds of applications, hundreds of different types of metadata available at your people, job titles, physical location, job codes that don't match with titles. The organization doesn't recognize a difference between a manager, a supervisor, or a director, or an analyst in one part of the company versus an analyst in another. And so what are you left with? You're left with these alternatives to try and fill in the cracks around RBAC. Now, when I look at RBAC, I think, okay, that's a great goal to have, but why don't we start with something easier like attribute-based? Are you an employee or not? That should be hopefully a very simple question and answer. Sometimes it's not, but can we at least agree on who is an employee versus a contractor or a customer or whatever the persona might be? And I think if you can layer different attributes together, then you have a little bit better chance of starting to put together a access control model that is actually effective, scalable, and an IAM or an IT team who's responsible for this type of stuff can actually live with it. So I feel like this is a soapbox I get on a lot, but I just feel like RBAC is one of the underutilized because it was so difficult and such a good idea. And the promise was, well, I'm just going to put my IJ tool in there and it's going to do role scanning for me and fix all this for us. I haven't seen it work that well. And I live and breathe this stuff all the time. So I feel like that's my 2 cents on it. So I'm going to step off my soapbox and ask Jim what he thinks.
I think authorization is a difficult topic. I mean, authentication used to be a difficult topic, right? When you had all these web applications and fat applications, and they were using different technologies for managing authentication. Different authentication was being mixed with coarse-grained authorization, and then along came SAML, and it just became a standard that it was just easier to live by. It's like, let's get people into the application, then let the application handle authorization. So now we kind of think authentication is way easier than authorization. And I think even before SAML, that was true. Now when you take authorization, you have some applications where it's like there's a finite list of roles, and you put a person into those roles. And then you have other applications, take your ERP platforms or take custom built applications where the authorization model is tremendously complex. Now, when you take something like RBAC, which, I think our tendency is to say, well, how can I solve all this problem with RBAC? And I don't think that's the answer. But I do think there is a place for RBAC. I think especially for, and I think RBAC and ABAC, they kind of combine, because you can get into the same conversation with what Jeff was saying is like, are you an employee or not? Well, you can create roles that trigger off of that attribute in your IGA system, for example, and say, all right, we're getting this feed from the HR system that you are employees. We're going to create a role called employees, and we're going to provision certain birthright access for employees. So I still think whether it's ABAC or RBAC, it kind of accomplishes the same thing. But when it gets to some of these real complex applications, I think the utility of RBAC breaks down. Now, could PBAC help solve this problem? Potentially. But I think even when you get to these big ERP systems, really becomes a matter of people caring about homogenizing the different types of access that can be provisioned, right? So that there are different types of people within that system. So you can get closer to that finite list of roles rather than everybody having an ad hoc access to that application, an ad hoc compilation of attributes and permissions within that app. As long as you're allowing that, I don't think any back model will really work. So the hard work is also on the application or platform side in terms of homogenizing authorization so that it can fit some type of model.
So you say homogenizing applications together. My curiosity there kind of piques a little bit, because with SaaS applications and with all the different applications coming in from different areas, homogenizing doesn't seem to be the thing that is happening. That's the part that we're missing. We've been working on RBAC for 6+ years at this point. And been building it out as best we can. And it always still comes down to, well, no, that application doesn't have that type of granularity to it. That's not an option. So there's a balancing act that has to happen between systems that allow you to handle front door access, essentially that entry level access to the application, but then doesn't have the APIs or doesn't have the connectors to do individual, to get into the granularity. You actually have to go to a portal or whatnot to be able to get that access figured out further. In those scenarios, are you still seeing a situation where you want to bring in, where you want to actually have somebody build out, basically like business owners build out that access or build out how that works.
I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? So if you're implementing something like an ERP system within your organization, even though the ERP system might be able to handle, thousands or hundreds of thousands of permutations of what a full set of authorizations could be, you can still have the discipline within your organization to say, we're only going to do this 10 types or these 100 types, which really, like, these are the important fields that we want to drive access based on. Now, understand, that might not be appropriate in all cases, because I think the biggest thing pulling against any kind of role model or, when you try to make authorization simpler, and by making it simpler, you're going to say, well, 90% of the people that need this access need these things, so let's just give it to 100%. That is not least privilege. At least it's not a black and white view of what least privilege is, because black and white view of least privilege is you only get the access that you need. So if we're giving you access that you don't need because it's more convenient, I'm sorry, that's not least privilege. I know that it might be just an academic argument, but I mean, that's the reality, in my opinion.
Since there isn't going to be that, that standard for the next, that won't occur for the next 5, 10, 15 years, if we're being optimistic, I think that's what's driving me to policy, because policy is more customized, policy is more a JSON statement or an XML statement of some sort that I can take and I can actually put in my if and thens and whiles into it. I hope that, I hope maybe in the future, in that standardization that you're talking about, we'll actually, we'll take that into consideration and use that as kind of the backbone of it.
Gee, Chris, it looks like you're picking some real easy ones to start off with. So I know you had at least 3 in mind already.
Sure. So let's take a step back. So I know that I've hit you with, with the non-human identities and gotten into the granularity there. I know we just got done talking about, about policy and RBAC. Why don't we talk about the team for a little bit, a little bit at this point? What, going to Identiverse and going to different conferences and talking, talking to dozens and dozens of people at this point and kind of getting into their stories and getting into what how their IAM teams work. What I find most interesting is how different we really all are. We all feel like we're doing the same thing. We all feel like we're basically heading in the same direction and trying to go after the same things. But our mode of transportation or our group that we're using to get there is so vastly different. And another article that I'm going to be working up is going into, kind of going into that. There's, there are groups, there are businesses out there that of course focus on all the different pieces, but, that in the end, you have to kind of have all the different elements. But the question is do you have a dedicated team to any one particular area? How heavyweight or lightweight do you go into each one? Personally, we're a governance shop. We're very much there to help the business, and they're very much there to enact what, enact whatever controls that are around it. That's kind of where our heavyweight is. And then we work toward, and then we do, we help facilitate that through taking care of the day-to-day provisioning. But with that, I'm learning that there's not just, there are teams out there, or there are departments out there and other organizations that solely focus on governance and then solely focus on provisioning. And then I'm finding out about new groups that are being spun up, especially with this latest trip to Identiverse, that are focusing on the cybersecurity side, the more cybersecurity focused side of it, being able to find phishing, trying to define and trying to build out phishing resistant IAM accounts or, identity accounts. And then there's the cloud teams that are trying to help the DevOps groups keep their infrastructure up and running and keeping this, the spin up and spin down and the keys that go along with it up and running. These are all things that, I'm at the kind of the beginning of that journey of understanding that we don't, as an operations team, we don't have to do it all. We have to do what's most important to our, what's most important to our individual groups. And then, but making sure that each one of those are touched in some way, form, or fashion by someone within the organization. How do do we feel as though that's the way, I'm so used to the idea of, everybody kind of just knows where they're going, knows the mode that they're running in. Sure. Whether or not you want pepperoni on your pizza or whether or not you want sausage, you kind of you make some little variations, but for the most part, it's still pizza in the end. Using a bad analogy at this point, I admit.
Especially around lunch.
Especially around lunch.
But a delicious one.
But is there going to be different? Is there going to be bigger changes than this, or is it or do you see this being, or you see those being still being the core, the core pieces of it going forward? Is there what should I be looking out for as far as an operations manager of IAM, kind of the doers of IAM? What should I be looking out for?
I think I'll go first. So I think you're getting into organizational design, which is somewhat or very specific to the organization, which has a lot to do with the size of the organization, how geographically dispersed, whether or not IAM is completely a central service or if it's more localized to where the people are. But I think we can make some general assumptions or talk about some general topics there. I think that one thing you have to look out for is because, especially in this identity space, if you design your organization around, all right, this is the product that we use for governance, and start just fixating on, okay, the product can solve these problems. And now there's another team that is really focused on another product that handles authentication maybe, or another product that handles privileged access management. So I think those are the big three when it comes to internal identity or workforce identity. Now the products are starting to encroach in each other's space. And what you have the potential for is that if you take a product view of the world, that then you start doing the same services within each other. And I think that's a real danger. So I think the teams, if you have separate teams supporting those, that you're doing offsite workshops or something, so those teams are collaborating on, okay, what is our strategy going forward for each of these teams to support, and where do we know where our lines of demarcation are? I think that's very important in a very large organization where these different domains are being covered by different groups. I think what I see more often is smaller teams where people are cross-trained across the groups and they're working within those groups, especially on not as much on the operations side necessarily, even though I do see that on the operations side as well. But build side, and certainly like the architect level where they're doing the big time planning of how all these tools work together. But I think that is very important, is not to get just locked into too focused of a picture. Yeah. What do you have, Jeff?
Yeah, and I agree with you. This is mostly organizational design. I think this is the classic centralized versus decentralized strategy that a lot of organizations might be looking at of, well, how do we handle our IAM functions? Do we try to build a central team that kind of does it all and separate that from the business? Or do we allow the business to administrate their own applications as long as they hopefully adhere to whatever standards or policies have been set up by a central organization? And I don't think the answer is, right or wrong either way. It really is a very personal decision for the organization. A lot of it comes down to the people within the organization itself. Where do your skill sets lie? Is Active Directory an IAM tool, or is that IT infrastructure? Most organizations, AD has been there forever. And so there's like a general IT or network group that kind of handles the Active Directory stuff, and maybe you have a different team that does your IGA platform or privilege access, or whatever it may be. So I think it's an interesting, discussion to have, because I think this is one of those things where you have, if I had to guess, Chris, when you write this, the comments are going to kind of fall into two different camps of a more centralized approach and a more of a, governance decentralized type approach. And, nobody's going to be wrong and nobody's going to be right. It's just like, well, here's what works for our organization, or well, hopefully it works for our organization. Some organizations, maybe they could stand to be a little more centralized and, or at least put out together, put better policies or standards, whatever it may be. And I think this is where IAM program management becomes so much more important when you're dealing with multiple areas of the business that are not directly underneath, your control as an identity person or even as an IT person. So I think I'd be curious to see what feedback comes through for that article.
Yeah, I agree with you both. As not surprising. And let's say, and Jeff, I think what you said really rings true to me, is because Active Directory is an IT function, is in our cases is an IT function, but who takes care of the care and feeding of Active Directory? We do, and we're underneath the security side of the side of the house. There's so much. It's so interesting to me, and in the last 3 years of being in this position of trying to learn that that I have different audiences that I have to that we have to work together with to be able to get identity handled properly. There's how do I talk SLAs to the business, and then talk about how does single sign-on actually work in the background to the IT side of the house, and what and their concerns with it, while then keeping a balancing act of my stakeholders in security asking the question of, well, can we make sure that we know that this guy really is in California or is he in New York? Let's know where the right answer of that, the location of these users are. It's an interesting challenge.
Another thing you brought up in your question or your topic, Chris, was, are some of these things going to go away? And I don't know if you were hinting at like, okay, AI is going to do these things for us, because
Maybe.
Look, if 5 years down the road, we're not just allowing business users to go into AI and say, I need to run a recertification campaign of all of my users who use this application, and I want to send that to this manager or the person's manager or whatever, and basically use prompt engineering to construct their own access certification. If that's not available in 5 years, like, what has AI really done, right? I mean, that should definitely be available in 5 years. And I got to think IGA companies know that if they're not doing that, someone's going to come along and invent that. So, yeah, I think some of these jobs that, I remember when I ran the IAM program for a bank, we had a person completely dedicated to running access certifications and managing access certifications that were in flight. Once those were all done, generating the reports and getting the next round started so that we could attest to access on a quarterly basis. Those things had better go away, right?
I still do have that guy you're talking about who does the quarterly certifications. We do function as a bank. So therefore, I do have that person on my team that they really do, or they do run access certifications day in and day out, night in and night out, trying to help manage that expectation. I've been, we are of course, interested in AI and kind of looking into what AI can do. But as a side note or tangent, I've been looking at it as a big data model kind of scenario more than more than necessarily an AI one. It's how do I take not only my IGA data, but my ServiceNow data and my cybersecurity applications data and my and other forms of data, and how do I put those things together to build a bigger picture of what's out there, to be able to answer more concise questions of, is that access really being used? Is that access really appropriate anymore by looking at the metadata around everything around it? It's a great question. And I would love an AI to help me do that, but I'm not there yet.
It's going to get better, right? I think AI, this is the worst it's ever going to be. It's going to keep getting better from here, and it's already pretty darn cool. I mean, I'm a fan of it. And the good news is you picked 3 really easy blog topics to get into, so I'm sure it'll be super easy to come up with different viewpoints. And I'm curious to see, the comments and the feedback. So I'll be looking forward to those. You've been very generous with your time, and it is a Sunday, so why don't you go? You even went into the office to record this, so above and beyond. But I have something very important to ask you as a Marvel fan, or as a co-Marvel fan. What are your thoughts on Robert Downey Jr. being announced as Dr. Doom, coming back to the Marvel Universe?
So I'm really curious on whether or not the mask will actually come off. That when reading the articles and reading the things that they talk about, about Robert Downey Jr. being Dr. Doom, I think the actor has a great ability to play, to be able to play the part. Can he play that villain? Can he play that, that kind of empowered, just like, master of all kind of character? Absolutely. Robert Downey Jr. will knock that out of the park. Will they, though, take the mask off? Will there be scenes in any way, form, or fashion where we really know it's him underneath it in any way, form, or fashion? I don't know how they do that. I don't know if they I would like to think Dr. Doom can't take it off, and therefore it's not a question. But if there is, are we doing a multiverse thing here? What's the play?
Well, yeah. I mean, he is Iron Man. He told you this, point blank to the camera, right? And then he snapped his fingers. Maybe that's a benefit, right? He's used to playing a character with a mask, being an Iron Man. Now, obviously, Tony Stark, pulls the mask off much more frequently than Dr. Doom, and I'm sure they'll take liberties because, they have to make a movie kind of out of it. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I think it's interesting to have the same actor playing 2 different roles within the same universe. And how do they explain that? Is it a multiverse angle?
Well, if you didn't, I don't want to, a little bit of a spoiler if you haven't seen the Deadpool Wolverine movie yet.
I have not. Don't spoil it.
All I'll say is Captain America makes an appearance, and then you'll see something else happen there too. That'll come to that same question. Okay.
Well, I'm a fan of Deadpool, so I'm looking forward to seeing that when I can. Jim, do you have any idea what we're talking about?
None whatsoever. Actually, I didn't know that there was a Deadpool movie and Wolverine.
Just see it for Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, you're right. I know that Ryan Reynolds is the Deadpool, but that's all I know.
Okay.
Now I'm kind of like, anything else they say is totally uninformed.
So when you hear the character Dr. Doom, what comes to mind? Just as somebody who's not familiar with this.
So those comic books were around when I was a kid, so I'm familiar with Marvel comic books. And what I found is, like, when these movies come out and they have these surprising things nobody was expecting, it was in one of those comic books, like number 138, that, I mean, who the heck's going to remember every section of a comic book? So I think the creators go back into the comic books. And one of the things that I'm always shocked by is, like, how dark some of those comic books really got, because I didn't realize it when I was a kid. I was collecting them and looking at them, but I wasn't looking at them in the way an adult would look at them, right? To really understand, like, the subplots. It was just like, looking at them like a kid, like, oh, that guy's cool. That guy's a bad guy. I don't like him, or whatever. So, but I always think it's neat how they tie it back to a real comic book, and then everybody's like, oh yeah, we should have known that was coming. It's kind of like how Game of Thrones tied back to those books, and, like, people who are, like, really geeked out on the books, what was it, like Fire and Ice or something like that, they'd be like, oh yeah, they kind of knew what was coming, etc. So It's similar to that.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see how Dr. Doom. So he's the main villain that's opposite of the Fantastic Four. So I know that there's been a Fantastic Four in the past. I don't think it was fantastic, but it was fine. So I know they're kind of rebooting that, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I just thought it was interesting. And, if you've seen the clips at this point, right, Robert Downey Jr. comes on the stage. There's a bunch of different Dr. Dooms, and he pulls off the mask. And then you see him. And this is how they announced it at like Comic-Con or something like that. So it was kind of a cool reveal to be, I guess, maybe if you were in the room and you're like, holy, whatever. That's Robert Downey Jr. Yeah. And, after him having had such a successful, journey through the whole Iron Man kind of process and into the Avengers, it's kind of interesting to see how they tackle that, or if they just ignore it. Like, it's a different role.
So aren't there like two lines of comic books? There's like that, and then there's the one where they had like the League of Nations or something. And I remember seeing a commercial now where Aquaman is fighting that one guy who's got like the
Well, now you're mixing DC and Marvel.
DC and Marvel. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I can't keep up with that stuff, man. I don't know how you guys do.
DC has not had a successful film background, I would say, with the exception of Batman's movies. Have probably been the best, but they haven't really been tied to like a DC universe of like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, The Flash, etc. Those sorts of things. I think Marvel has definitely done a much better job of getting their characters out there and, producing good, fun films to see.
Wasn't there like a Superman versus Batman where they were fighting with each other? And it was like, that was pretty dark, wasn't it?
Most of the DC films have been dark. I don't know, Chris, about you, but I feel like DC tends to be a little bit of a darker approach to their characters compared to Marvel.
Yeah, DC's always been darker. Marvel's always been a little bit more upbeat, a little more like there's a happy ending to the story kind of thing, where in a DC movie there's no guarantee that the movie doesn't end with everybody dead and the storm clouds basically dissipating around the world. That's a normal look.
All right. Well, we got into it. I was curious, Chris, as to see what you would thought about Robert Downey Jr. coming back, but let's go ahead and leave it there for this week. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to have a link in our show notes to your LinkedIn article. Connect with Chris on LinkedIn and, maybe provide some fodder for articles coming up or opinions and things like that. Jim, you and I are on LinkedIn, so definitely connect with us and, send us comments, feedback, etc. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com, Twitter, X, whatever it's called, at IDAC Podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Hit that like and subscribe button. That's the best way you can help us out. If you're not watching us on YouTube, do us a favor and jump over to YouTube real quick and give us a subscription. That would be fantastic. To make it easy, you can hit idacpodcast.tv. That'll take you right to our channel. And we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks everyone for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with y'all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.